Hey everybody, and welcome back to the 21st Talks podcast. My name is Coleman Snell. I want to say thank you to everyone who supported us in this hiatus so far. I packed up my entire life, transferred to a new university that I've been hoping to go to for like most of my life so far. I would say probably over a decade. And now I am settled here and getting back in the flow of things when it comes to writing and creating episodes. And I'm so excited to break this hiatus with such a good episode. It's part one of a multi-part series where we will be discussing the history of existential risk with S.J. Beard, who is a researcher at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge, and is an absolutely fascinating researcher when it comes to their breakdown of how the field came to what it is today. We talk about the prehistory of existential risk, so we talk about Carl Sagan, who I love, Isaac Asimov, a few other thinkers and early fiction writers who kind of laid a lot of the foundation, both intellectually but also just within the space of imaginaries, right? And they started the discussion to some degree. And that was a really fun aspect of the discussion. And then we also talk about the role that philosophers have played in existential risk and maybe what their future might be in the field. So nonetheless, very, very thankful for everyone who supported us through this hiatus once again. If you want to support us going forward, now that we're actually releasing content again on a somewhat regular basis, you can go ahead and become a patron on our Patreon that we launched during the summer. Even a buck or two a month really, really helps us out. Or if you're strapped for cash, that's totally okay. You can also share us with your friends and family on whatever social media platforms, or I don't know, go around your town stapling pieces of paper with our logo on it. However you want to get the word out about 21st Talks. Sure, dirigibles. If you have access to one and want to put our logo on the side of it, just hit me up. DMs are always open. But nonetheless, if you can't subscribe to our Patreon or share information about it for whatever reason, leaving us a like and rating on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast on also goes a really, really long way, along with just sharing this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. All of it really, really goes to helping the project. But nonetheless, without any further ado, links for everything that I mentioned are down below, but here is my interview with Dr. S.J. Beard from CSER. What are the forces, challenges, and ideas that define the 21st century? Conversations to understand the greatest figures and stories of today to create a better tomorrow. This is the 21st Talks podcast. Sweet. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to 21st Talks podcast. I'm here with Dr. S.J. Beard. How are you doing today?
I'm okay.
So I think we'll be recording this most likely in two parts. But if we want to go ahead and jump right into it, I was wondering if you could tell us and the audience at home what work you're working on right now and why you think it matters.
Yeah, so right now I've been going through a period actually of mostly finishing off projects. I'm very good at starting projects and getting excited about them and then getting excited about something else. So for the last kind of, 6 months to a year, there's been so much going on at CSER, and we're kind of growing and we're looking to do another fundraising round and all the, lots of really exciting administrative things. But it's had this effect that it's kind of prevented me from starting many new research projects. So I've been going through and I had no idea, absolutely no idea. I had so many kind of papers and things that were basically ready to go, but just kind of needed a few more little things. So I'm currently working on a paper to kind of follow up on a panel session that we did a couple of months ago, me with Matthias Maas and Alisa Sundaram, about kind of some of our doubts and personal doubts and uncertainties about what existential risks are, how we should study them, what else is going on in the field, and how we can all try and work better. And those are kind of making public some conversations that have been going on for years. But there's also been a paper that we've been writing for years and really trying to finish that off. I've also been recently finishing up another chapter on a long-standing project I have going with Patrick Kaczmarek where we are looking at kind of different philosophical arguments for prioritizing human extinction. And there's these really good arguments about why consequentialists, why utilitarians need to care about human extinction. But we think that people who follow this kind of social contract tradition also have very strong reasons. But that's been very little written about. So just really kind of making that case and trying to get on board, because sometimes you get people, I think, especially when you talk, for instance, to people in public health or lawyers or so on, they say, well, I'm not a utilitarian. I don't like utilitarianism at all. So I don't really have any reason to care about this existential risk stuff because all the arguments they get are utilitarian consequentialist arguments. That's just kind of a lot of filling in the gap. I think a lot of papers that I work on, and this goes for the kind of history paper we're going to be talking about today, really what happens is there's something I really want to see. Like, I wish I could find this thing, and I can't. No one else has done it yet. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to write it then. And I feel terribly like I'm no way the right person to be writing this. I'm underqualified. Like, there's so many people who know so much more about this subject. But nevertheless, I might, just because I kind of have the motivation to do it, I can still be the best person, even though I can think of many, many, on paper, better people. And so, a lot of my research is just kind of, where do I see the gaps? And then hopefully once I've kind of produced it, other people will see, I was really missing this. And I didn't even know I was missing it, but now I can see it. Now I can see the value of it.
Can I ask on that point? So I think a little bit later, I'm really excited to chat with you about some of the novel challenges and massive areas of success for working in such a new field, such as existential risk, or I think for the purpose of the discussion, we'll probably refer to it as either ERS, like you do in the paper, or just X risk. But with that out of the way, I'm really excited to hear sort of some of the novel challenges of working in the field. And I've not heard that problem put in that way before. That specifically the issue of these gaps in kind of the research right now, which can be like, especially when writing up a literature review like me and my project partner, Nathaniel Cook are right now, these gaps can be a little bit like scary sometimes, because it's like, oh, we're talking about human extinction and there isn't stuff on this specific aspect of like human psychological responses to it. But with that being said, even if we aren't the perfect person to write those articles, having the interest alone it sounds like you're saying is absolutely requisite to writing something, so that's a really, really wonderful way of approaching that. I
think this is a huge problem with the field. I think this is a problem with any kind of new domain of knowledge. And one of the interesting patterns that you see repeating over and over again is this kind of phenomenon where philosophers give birth to sciences. Philosophers are not scientists. We're not well trained in science. We say a lot of things that are, scientifically quite illiterate, but we're the academic shock troops. If you go into a field and there's nothing there, no one knows how to study this, no one knows what this is, like our superpower, our special ability is, okay, we can still talk about that. We can talk about what is absolutely unknown, because there are still things that we can start with. We can talk about the epistemology. We can talk about the ethics of that situation. We can kind of use these as bridgeheads to start building an understanding of the kind of problems, the priority areas, what the important things are, who are the people who might be able to go and solve this. And then, ever since kind of Aristotle really jump-starting fields like biology and physics, and, Descartes is very involved in the foundation of optics, and, I'm trying to Adam Smith with the founding of economics, you often find it's a philosopher who gets the ball rolling, and then other people say, well, you got all of these things wrong, and we can do better than that. And then they build the field like that. And that's been very much the way that ERS has evolved. All the early entrants into it as a unified field kind of came from philosophy or had a lot of training in philosophy, and used that to start talking about the subject. But then now the field has grown far beyond that. And that's really wonderful and great. And I think as an academic, trying to approach one of these problems about which nothing has been said, it's really hard because you want to get it right, but you're not going to get it right. You're going to get it wrong. But by getting it wrong in an interesting way, you can still kind of provide the germ of something that will get better and better over time. And it's really, the community that builds and moves towards more right answers.
Do you see, because we're working on something that's so new as existential risk, what do you use to explain this sort of like almost like seemingly requisite interdisciplinary approach that early researchers, I don't know if you would consider them your cohort or like the cohort of researchers, like one or two cohorts before you, but these Bolstroms and I believe Beck said it's also the same, the case where they were analytic philosophers, typically at Oxford or Cambridge, and also computer scientists, or also doing something with technology and the specific scientific approach of it.
Yep.
For me personally, it's philosophy and psychology. Like I knew I needed to have a science. That's what I wanted to go with. That and data analytics. I think those three together are going to be a massively powerful tool. But it felt like, just from looking at the people before me in the field, having a sort of dual equipness with philosophy and also a science, a formal science, was the best way to kind of set myself up. And I was wondering if that's something you kind of see across the field generally, because I know that you did did you do a master's and a PhD at London School of Economics, or where did you do the PhD? Okay, and it was in analytic philosophy, specifically pertaining to ethics of population, correct?
That was, so my PhD dissertation was in population ethics. Although it's kind of, I think a more accurate description is that my PhD dissertation is on the work of Derek Parfit and kind of developing and applying that, because my interests definitely range more broadly, and I've always just found Parfit a most incredibly interesting philosopher and someone to work with. And I kind of get excited about Parfit in the way that, I know a lot of other people get excited about people like Kant and Aristotle and so on. So I always sort of felt that I was pushed to describe it in a really kind of applied way. And it is. And I did want to make it applied, but that actually the real kind of focus was in interpreting and building on the work of Parfit.
Can I ask you why applied philosophy? What was in your mindset at that time? Because that's one of the things that I am particularly interested in when it comes to doing public communication, is philosophy has helped so many people throughout history, right? Like Hegel says that course of human history is relived, or the course of philosophy of history and history of philosophy is relived in the mind of every young philosopher. I think that there's this really beautiful, like, internal representing the external effect that you have when you're learning philosophy that can be really consoling, both personally and kind of politically and all these other areas of life that matter. But like, I feel like a lot of the gusto of philosophy has kind of been lost in, the last 100 years of the analytic tradition. And I was wondering what it is that you think ignited that desire to have it be practical to some degree, or pragmatic, or have these sort of real world effects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot going on there. So I think analytic philosophy is still really reacting to the logical positivists and the Vienna Circle and Wittgenstein and people who said you can't make substantial claims within philosophy. You are just you're just talking nonsense. You're inventing terms and then you're arguing about the meaning of those terms, but in a way that's unproductive. And that really provided a big challenge to philosophy to show that actually what it was arguing about was something substantial and meaningful and important. And I think that, there have been various kind of ways that philosophers have responded to that. So, for instance, one of the big concerns of Derek Parfit throughout his life was to really show that the position that there are truths in ethics is a justifiable position to hold. That there's no strong argument against this view, and that there are good reasons to think that there are these moral truths. That we are the human mind is this kind of reason detector, that we're going around looking for facts about the universe to give us reasons to act in certain ways and not act in other ways. So that's one way to just kind of really focus on defending that claim. Another way, which always in my mind is really heavily associated with rules, was just to make philosophy really analytical. The moral philosophy and rules is the case, but other philosophers to just kind of really look at, okay, how do we use terms of moral or epistemic or metaphysical importance, and what needs to be true in order for our use of these terms in this way to be valid, and then to kind of theorize in that way. But then another way has just been to kind of say, well, what I am doing is useful because here are its uses, here are its implications. And I think that this has been, a particular challenge that was thrown at philosophy. And although we hardly study anymore the kind of logical positivists, we accept that, their critique is self-defeating, because on their grounds, logical positivism is as meaningless as any other branch of philosophy. But still, that's kind of not enough. And there are definitely still people who, have this kind of strong critique that philosophy is useless. And I think there's still this kind of wound, this need to kind of heal philosophy and show it's a productive discipline. I do also think that while that's a particular condition of philosophy, every academic subject is currently going through this kind of desperate search for relevance and impact. And this is just kind of where academia is at the moment. And, the way you show your worth and you guarantee your funding and all the rest of it is to show the value of what you do. So I think there are particular reasons why this is maybe even more entrenched in philosophy, or maybe it started earlier. But, there isn't a discipline out there where people aren't sort of going on and on and on about, oh, this is practical value, and this is, these are the policymakers I'm going to affect, and these are the value I'm going to give to them with my theories.
In many ways, trying to scream at the universities why it is worth their department not having the funding cut, I think, is another big area of this, which, of course, when it comes to STEM, right, that's one of the aspects of existential risk and DRS that I love so much, is there is this inherently interdisciplinary nature of it that doesn't only make for wonderful discussions around the water cooler at the research office, but also, I'm sure, it really helps diversifying potential funding streams for research, right? So you have all this really interesting work being done by philosophers that just has a lot of, it's almost reconnected philosophy with its very, very early modern origins that, led to a lot of the aspects of the scientific revolution, right? You mentioned Descartes earlier, but you can, take other philosophers or, sort of pseudo philosophers who are just natural philosophers at, the first half of the scientific enlightenment, who were scientists principally, and it's quite interesting to think that, like, a lot of the very useful aspects of philosophy, by talking about, like, sort of material impacts of inventions and science and discovery, a lot of those were, as soon as philosophy produced it, were kind of brought into their own fields, right? Like you were saying earlier. I think that definitely hasn't helped with philosophy's PR side of things, right? Definitely hasn't made it seem more useful.
That's the best thing. That's the best thing about us. That's why
it's so cool.
You should carry on being philosophers, because whatever you think about what we do in our day jobs, like, we have really good effects, really good secondary effects. So, we're needed around the place. But and the more ERS grows as a field, the less kind of defined by philosophy it will be. And that's the philosopher's credit, because they got the party started. But whether that will kind of, we are, because I worked at the Future of Humanity Institute before I moved to the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, and I really felt it that FHI is part of the Oxford Philosophy faculty, whereas the Center for the Study of Existential Risk has been founded separately from philosophy. We're kind of in our own separate place in the university, and we've always had strong connections with the philosophy faculty, but there's also always been a strong disconnect, and there's no sense that kind of they feel like they own us. And I think that has helped the center really diversify more quickly and more completely than we would have done if we had a stronger link with philosophy at Cambridge.
That's a really interesting point there. Jumping more specifically into the paper you wrote with Phil Torres, Ripples on the Great Sea of Life. And published in 2020, right? Written in 2019, published in 2020, or written primarily in 2020 as well?
No, begun in 2018.
Okay.
as I say, I start projects, I don't finish them. It's still not published. Like this, what we've got up at the moment is a preprint.
I was not aware. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So thank you.
It's not gone through. It's very much a work in progress. I suspect it's not going to be published in its current form. It's too long for an academic paper. It's too short for a book. Either it will get published as a series of academic papers, or it will get turned into a book, or both. Watch this space. Sometime around 2027, maybe.
Yeah. All right.
But so I'm really glad that it's kind of up there as a preprint and people can read it and stuff. And,
it's one of those papers where anytime someone in some of the public communication and specifically the communal learning space projects that I work on with 21st Talks and Existential Risk generally, anytime someone is immediately new to the field, the first thing we do to get them equipped to join the group is we just go, hey, read this, read Ripples on the Great Sea of Life. And we sit down and we walk through different phases and we identify which parts of it they're the most interested in. It is a wonderful blueprint for approaching the field and starting to get some very nice specifics, and really walks a wonderful line between technical but not so technical it's inaccessible. And because of that, I'm deeply impressed by it, but what you and Torres were able to do there.
Good. And I'm really glad about that, because I've always found that when I'm new to a field, my go-to books are always the history books first.
Absolutely.
It's such a good way to firstly to build up the ideas slowly over time. The historical development allows you to think about things one at a time and take them on board, but also to provide the context that I always think is really important for fully understanding an idea and fully understanding why there are different approaches out there, why people are saying different things. I'm really glad to hear that, because that was very much the intention. Or that was very much one of the intentions, I should say.
We were so I was really hoping that I have to switch the we to I's because unfortunately Natheo can't be here to co-host. But I was wondering if more specifically we could jump a little bit more into the prehistory of existential risk as a field, and specifically what was the role of the sort of creative folks, fictional writers, science fiction, and then also in the second part of the question, early concerned scientists, especially Carl Sagan. If you have any fun facts about Carl Sagan, I am a massive Carl Sagan nerd and fan.
Gosh,
so
I suspect you probably have many more facts about Carl Sagan than I did, but I thought it was really important to write those, because I think there is a big difference between 20th century movements that were very concerned about existential risk. And this is nothing new. Our parents' generation grew up really worried about catastrophes from nuclear war, and all other concerns also have a really deep history. But there was no, until the foundation of FHI, some of the our final century, these events in the early 2000s, no one was saying, "Oh, I'm a researcher into existential risk." It was just people who had a concern and wrote about that concern and used human extinction sometimes as just a way of highlighting the relevance or importance of what they were saying. Sometimes, they had good reason for thinking that this was an existential threat, but it was all completely isolated. And you get this feeling when you read it of humanity stumbling from crisis to crisis or concern to concern. But there's not really much of a sense that anyone's learning from what happened before. That, for instance, that when Sagan and others were writing about nuclear winter in, the 1980s, that they were really going back and reviewing what people had done in the 1950s about early concerns about nuclear winter. So for instance, you get the Russell-Einstein Manifesto and the foundation of the Pugwash conferences, and they achieve a lot of interesting things. But it's such a very different approach, really get the scientific establishment on board, get everyone signed up, work across, political lines, and set up these quasi-academic conferences to solve everything. And it's all really quite high-minded and technical stuff. It's very different to then what Sagan and his colleagues do when they do nuclear winter, which is just, let's get this is really concerning, let's get this out as quickly as possible and really kind of push the public awareness button. And I don't get any sense that there was a kind of sense of, oh, well, they did it like this, and this was the good things, and these were the bad things, and so we're going to do it differently. It was just a kind of, okay, this is what makes sense now, and we'll just do this. So yeah, I really thought that there was this sense of a lack of history within the field, a lack of a really time-based thinking that people have been trying to do this now for 75 plus years. And, the problems are all still here. And we really need to work on getting better at this. We need to get better at studying these risks. We need to get better at, how we responsibly communicate them so that it's not, you get the public attention, but it's not a kind of flash in the pan and then dies away. And how do we kind of make the right connections between the science research and the politics side of things as well? And you only really see that if you can take this longer view and think, well, what were people doing before there was a recognizable field of existential risk studies? So that was the reason for kind of wanting to write those parts of the paper. And I think there's a lot more we could have said. And I'm still working on developing these stories and trying to learn the key lessons behind that. I think starting with science fiction, though, is really sort of trying to get at where does this idea of human extinction and this fear that humanity might go extinct, where does it come from? And there are some early kind of examples within science, but most of them are not really credible. They don't really have much of an impact. No one's really concerned about them until 1945. And, nuclear weapons really bring people's attention that, these do have the power to bring about human extinction somehow or other. But long before that, people were still thinking and worrying about human extinction. And, some quite senior people like Winston Churchill writes this article about human extinction in, the mid-1920s. And H.G. Wells is writing fiction, but also nonfiction work on human extinction going back into the end of the 19th century. And this idea has been around for a long time. And I think, again, just acknowledging that actually, in this case, like it was philosophers who got the field of ERS, that party rolling, but it was really science fiction authors who got the idea of human extinction, and that this was something that people were in a position to take credibly. Actually, it was the fiction authors who really started that ball rolling, and that they're still doing it. I think a lot of philosophers, a lot of existential risk scholars are really interested, for instance, in CSER news. Remembrance of worlds past. That's not right. Anyway, the three-body problem, the Dark Forest, that trilogy. Octavia Butler's work is another one that's been really influential on me and on various other people at the center. Well. There's lots of science fiction authors who are still writing about this, and it still seems relevant. So kind of give them their due as well, and trace some of that story as well. But this is really kind of setting the stage, I think, for the big question of why it is we now think about human extinction as its own thing rather than just something that fits in with existing concerns or tropes or whatever.
How connected is like storytelling about society, whether human or other intelligent life, that stretches on for eons, right? Like in the early Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, right? It's painting a picture that's literally galactic in time scale and direct size. How important is it to lean, like, what do you think the role of stories that were kind of big history or deep history stories that really paint the picture of like individuals existing within one part of a very small, timeline that actually stretches on for potentially like millions of years? Because it seems like at that point in human history, many of the religious narratives that were incredibly popular and prolific within dictations of human perception at the time, a lot of the stories maybe stretched back 10,000 years, and then it wasn't until the early 50s that we first identified the actual age of the Earth being 3.6 billion, and then eventually it was not until the 90s that it was 96 that we discovered that the universe is 13.6 billion years old. Like all this timescale we're working on has quickly, really quickly expanded in the 20th century. And I was wondering like what you think the connection of science fiction is to that expansion of timescale and how that relates to sort of this long-termist view in existential risk.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting. No, it is a whole lot. And I think probably this is where we need to finish for today.
Absolutely.
But I think there's a lot going on there. So one thing to bear in mind is the linear view of time that we work with, that our culture and our civilization works with, is actually probably quite a recent invention. The really classical view of time is that time is circular. Time is about cycles. Because if you think all the things that we measure time with, the passage of the sun through the sky, the passage of the seasons, the life cycles of plants and animals and humans, the rise and falls of civilizations, these things are all cyclical. And actually the way that people talk about time throughout most of history and in many cultures around the world, it shows this. It's a really cyclical view about time, that things come and go, and there's a cycle, and everything is conserved, and maybe it comes to an end, but the end is also a beginning. That's the obvious way to think about the world. And early modern Europe really popularizes, really makes use of this idea of linear time, in part taken from interpretations, of the Bible and of the Book of Revelations, and the idea of, okay, so there was a creation, and there is this kind of the Jesus is in the middle, and we got this kind of second coming and Armageddon at the end, and we can kind of plot a linear course between these events. And then when that gets mapped on then to economic ideas about actually growth is something that we can experience and we can sustain, and we can look back on. So when people sort of started looking back on classical civilization at the end of the Middle Ages, and they thought about a renaissance and a rebirth, and it's a really classical idea. But then there's an idea that no, we can actually move beyond that. We can be more than Rome. We can go further. Because now we have science, or now we have technologies, and now we've discovered the Americas and all of these other achievements. You really get time becomes linear and growth becomes potentially infinite. And that opening up of perspectives then invites people to really come and play with this idea and think about, okay, so what does the far future look like, and how is it going to be different to us, and how is the past? And so, for instance, one thing you get is there's this branch of utopian and dystopian fiction, where utopia is meant to be no place or the good place. It's somewhere else. Then within the 19th century, this changes to what some people call uchronia and dyschronia. All of a sudden, people stop writing about foreign lands. They start writing about the far future, because that's much more interesting. And sometimes it's a really good future, and sometimes it's a bad future, and sometimes it's just an interesting future. But that idea of, if we've got this linear time, if we've got this big future to play with, what could happen? And that's really the canvas that then science fiction authors can start to play with. And yeah, I mean, if you look at the first, big work of fiction that looks at human extinction, Mary Shelley's The Last Man, it's forever kind of jumping forward in time, and there's this plague, and one of the characters goes to sleep and loses a bunch of time, and it just keeps on kind of jumping forward, because that's needed to really have this catastrophe pan out. And that connection between moving into the far future and realizing that far future could be very good or very bad, and very bad could include human extinction. It's a really big conceptual leap, and they were the first people to get there, but they wouldn't have got there without these other changes in ideas about progress and ideas about time and religion. And it's all it's a really big intellectual soup. And one of the things that has often struck me about existential risk, since before I sort of ever thought about this as a field, just kind of thinking, I guess, particularly about climate change, I was thinking, but is this idea of how often we kind of find that the thing that causes us the problems is also the thing that provides us with the solution. And here, this kind of switch to linear time and to universal progress and the huge increase in the speed of scientific and technological development that in the mid 20th century goes and develops a whole bunch of ways that humanity might go extinct, had already led in the early 19th century to an awareness of the possibility of human extinction, people talking about that, so that then when the concerns emerge, there's already plenty of ideas in the popular consciousness for them to latch onto. And I don't think that was necessary. I think it could have happened different otherwise. I think we could have had a situation where people started to talk about the possibility of human extinction only long after we had actually developed atomic weapons, or long after we'd really been working on climate change, and we would be debating about, is this even possible, before we could get on and debate stuff about climate science or nuclear winter hypotheses. And thank goodness, but in our history it was kind of written this way, that we got the human extinction first.
I've never heard the connection of time travel and in early science fiction happening around the same time as Shelley wrote that first major piece on human extinction, or that involved it. I never have heard of time travel being so intimately connected with that. That's such a fantastic intellectual soup. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm excited to talk more about this in the future with you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on for this wonderful shorter interview, and I'm excited for recording the second part of it. Maybe we can get Torres or someone else on for it. Who knows?
Great.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, yep. Let's arrange another meeting, and we can